Today's video is brought to you by Glass Spider Publishing. Offering a wide range of hybrid book publishing services, Glass Spider Publishing is your one-stop shop for professional editing, design, publication, and book marketing services. Visit glassspiderpublishing.com today to learn more. Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, as typical, I'm using a 12 by 16 inch canvas board. You can use any size, shape, or type of canvas that you like. I have not prepared this canvas in any way whatsoever. And I'm going to start out with my underpainting. So I'm using my number 12 Filbert, loading up with a good amount of medium, lots and lots of medium. And then I'm mixing alizarin crimson and Payne's gray together. It just gives me a little bit of a violet-y type underpainting. I kind of wanted to use the same underpainting as I did in my last video, which was a mix of Diox purple and cadmium orange, but I wasn't using either of those colors in this painting, and I just wanted to keep my palette a little bit simpler. So I went with the alizarin and Payne's gray mixture. Now I know technically it's a little early for fall paintings, but the fall fever has hit me very, very hard already, so I hope you'll indulge me because I'll probably be doing fall/Halloween videos straight through the end of October from here on out. So if you're not a fan of that, then I guess I'll see you after the season. If you are a fan of that, then I hope that you enjoy what's coming. Making sure that that background is perfectly dry before we move on. And now I'm going to my number 8 Filbert, loading up with Payne's gray and a good amount of medium, nice transparent color here. I'm going to sketch on my forms and my composition. So I'm finding the center of the canvas and then moving up a little bit to draw the line of the horizon. Remember to keep that paint nice and thin. You don't want thick, heavy globs, and you don't want the paint terribly opaque. Nice and transparent. Sketching in the distant trees and shrubs and whatever else is going on back there. Avoid any amount of detail at this point. We're simply looking for the shapes and the values. So if what's in the background is supposed to be darker than the foreground, for example, we want to get that background nice and dark. We're just looking at the shadows of things right now. I know it can be tempting to start doing some details, putting in tree branches and rocks and things like that, but avoid doing that at this point. Sketching in my little dirt road. Got to figure out where it's going to end, and that's how you know how to get there. And the other side, remember to make your road go off into the distance. It's got to be more narrow in the back. The curves need to be tighter. And as it comes forward, it gets wider and the curves become softer. Now here I did obviously make that road really sharp in order to find it, but I don't want it to be that sharp. I want it to be an old country road, dirt road. Maybe it doesn't get traveled a lot. So I'm gonna start breaking that line up, going over top of it. Take care to do that. I see a lot where people say, oh, my road doesn't look good, or, doesn't look right. And I think primarily what's going on is some people are leaving those edges very sharp, very crisp, and that's what kind of throws off the look. So don't be afraid of, going into your road too much. Even if you almost lose where your road is, once you start doing color, you're going to bring that back. So don't treat those edges as precious. They are not precious. They are unwanted. Get rid of them. Break up those sharp lines. And I'm just leaving the road streaky because it's going to kind of be streaky once we're done with it. Gonna have a little hill here on the left with some trees growing out of the top of it, so just getting some shadow in there. And once again, I'm gonna get out the blow dryer and make sure that this is completely dry. We're gonna go through and nudge the shadows darker one more time before we start playing with the color. This really is my favorite part of every painting. I love being able to essentially take it to almost a completed piece with the shadows. You can tell exactly what's supposed to be going on here, and it almost looks like a completed piece, you know, except it's missing some details. But really from here, if you wanted, you could just add some trees and some details and call it good, be done with it. And so I kind of like that. It's almost like getting to do two paintings in one. You know, I am darkening these back trees, but notice I am taking care that it's not pure black. I don't want to lose that purpley color through there because that's what's going to help me sell that these are in the distance. That purple is going to glow through because remember, as things move away from us, they get duller and grayer, and it's that purple in there that's going to help contribute to that grayness that keeps them in the distance. Just picking up more medium. I did not pick up more paint. Everything on the ground that I just left purple, I'm going to kind of dust a bit of this super, super transparent color over top of it. Because my brightest part is really going to be my sky. So everything on the ground should have a bit of shadow on it. And one last time, let's blow dry this underpainting, and then we're going to get busy adding some color. We're going to start in the sky here. Sticking with my number 8, I'm going to start with some white and just add a tiny point of yellow. I'm looking for a super pale, bright color. And I don't know if you've noticed here, but this part that I'm working on is not the same background that I just painted. So I had been recording this painting, and then halfway through it, I decided I needed to include a color that I wasn't working with because I was struggling without that color. So I stopped painting the one you're watching me paint now and started over. Thankfully, I still had this clip because when I got to this point in the painting we're actually working on, I was not with it, I guess, and I didn't hit record. So Thankfully, I painted the sky the exact same way in both paintings, but I'm just taking this super transparent, super pale, warm color and skittering it through the sky, kind of concentrating on the right half. And then I'm just brightening it up a little bit more, taking that out. I added a little bit more yellow. Everything is very thin, and I'm using the side of my brush to nudge the colors together. I don't want any separation in these colors. A little more orange, really start to warm it up. More yellow, nice and bright. And don't be afraid of your trees. You can overlap those distant trees. Just kind of scatter the colors wherever you feel like you want to see them. Now I'm going to take some alizarin, just make a warm pink color. I did not wash my brush, so I still have that orange and yellow and everything on there. Tiny bit of pains, just because it nudges it ever so slightly again to that violet. Good amount of medium. And I really liked this color over here on the left. But definitely taking it down into those trees, leaving a lot of that purple underpainting showing. And just blending it with some of that warm, bright color. I cleaned off my brush, grabbed some white and some cerulean, and everything I left purple back there. Obviously keeping some medium in it so it's transparent, but everything I left purple is going to start getting some of this transparent sky blue color. And just like before, do not be afraid to let the blue and the yellow mingle on your canvas. Even if that yellow is still wet, it's okay if it mixes with the blue. A hint of green in the sky is not a bad thing. But I know it is something that a lot of people kind of struggle with. They have a hard time getting any amount of green in the sky. Just use your soft brush pressure on the edge of your brush and get everything kind of overlapping and kind of playing together in that sky. More blue into that mixture so it's a little bit darker, a little bit truer blue. And we're going to start working down toward the horizon. For sure, overlap those trees. See, right over those trees, but because this color is on the transparent side, I won't lose them. But that cerulean color is really going to help push the trees into the distance more. Now here we are back to the painting we're actually working on, and I'm going to grab a little bit of paints and just cerulean, no white, just paints and cerulean, nice and transparent, and we're going to put this over the base of the trees. Keep it nice and dark, but keep it fogged out and in the distance. And let's start working on the ground. So I'm going to start with some yellow and some burnt sienna. Gives you a really great fall kind of pop color. I love that color mixture. A little bit of medium, as always, got to keep it nice and transparent to start, and just lightly scumbling this through the foreground. Overlap your shadow color. I'm going to keep this color primarily to the foreground. I don't want to put it in the way distance because our colors start to get a little less warm as they move away. I'm going to add a bit of cerulean to that mixture because it is going to give me a hint of a dried old green, but it's going to start cooling this color off so that I can use it in the distance. And I added a hint of white. So it's a pretty seamless transition that starts to give us that atmospheric perspective. I did not clean off my brush, just grabbed some more paints and some burnt sienna. And just working into kind of the transition between the pop color and my shadowy area. And one of these shadowy areas here in the foreground, both the ones on either side of the road and the one at the top of the hill, to feel like it was just full of kind of autumn debris, whether it's rocks or dried grasses and twigs or leaves. Maybe there's even some dirt exposed. There, I did clean off my brush, doing the burnt sienna paints mixture, but then cooling off that burnt sienna with a little bit of cerulean. I know I've told you guys before, but I just want to hammer that point home. Cerulean is such a wonderful color for toning down the vibrancy of warm colors and also of creating distance. So use cerulean whenever you want to subtly tone down something or create atmospheric perspective. And I'm just kind of going back and forth in that mixture. Sometimes it's heavier on one color or another, but we're just working on getting some kind of dirt type color in the road here. Leaving space, of course, for other colors and especially for the watercolors that we're going to do later. Kind of creating a transition from those trees in the distance to the grasses as well. Maybe it's shadows or, again, debris. And now I'm going to my 5/8 inch angle. I'm going to load up with some white. We're going to work on our sky again. A little bit of yellow, kind of getting that super pale, warm color again. Tiny, tiny poke of orange. A bit of medium, but not as much as before. I don't want it quite as transparent. Laying that paint down a little bit thicker than I did in the first place, and then scooting it around. A little bit warmer, a little bit brighter. Let some of that brushwork show. So I'm not fogging it out quite as much as I did that first time. Same colors as I used in the sky. Basically just going to cover the whole sky again in those colors. I love the way that alizarin plays in the sky, especially next to the cerulean. They work really, really well together. I'm really only doing these 2 layers on the sky, but you feel free to do as many as you feel like you need to get the look that you want. If you really want to do 5 or 8 or 20 layers in the sky to get your look, feel free to do it. Back into my cerulean mixture. Overlapping everything. I just picked up a little bit of medium so that it really helps me kind of streak that color without covering. I know the sky is kind of similar to the sky I did in my last video, but it's a technique that I'm really excited about. I've been doing skies like this a lot lately, so you might see them again here and there. I'll try not to do every single painting the exact same, but I do really enjoy painting the sky in kind of this free-flowing, misty way. A little more cerulean, deepening that color a bit. And down to the horizon. And I want to make sure, I like that there's no difference between the horizon and the sky. You can't tell where one begins and where one ends. And I love that look. So I'm absolutely overlapping my horizon. Trees that distant, where I have my horizon, they're super, super, super short, they wouldn't be crisp. It would just kind of be a little darker shape that kind of disappears into both the sky and the ground. Clean brush, mixed up some pains and some alizarin. A good amount of medium, nice and transparent here. And I'm working this color just to the base of these tree shapes. Or I guess they're like clusters of trees, not specific tree shapes. Just pulling everything upwards. All right, back to the ground. And I'm using my number 8 Filbert. This is my soft, short handle detail brush from my original line. And I'm mixing cadmium yellow with the burnt sienna. Again, that sunny, warm color. And just taking down that vibrancy, just a hint to make it a little more of a realistic color with some of the cerulean. Tiny hint of white. Substantially more than a tiny hint of white, and a little bit of medium. And let's work in the distance here. So just the very tip of the brush, very lightly applying some of this grayed down color, kind of loosely, creating some texture in the ground. Let it fade into the horizon. Don't leave a hard line of this color at the horizon. We worked so hard to make that horizon soft. Let's make sure it stays that way. Gonna add a little bit more yellow, just make it a bit more vibrant and just create some texture through the different layer of colors. But keeping it a little light and gray for the distance. pulling some more burnt sienna and a hint of cadmium orange into that because we are going to be working toward the foreground. Even throw in a little alizarin just for some difference and variety. Don't pull this warm color too far back. Still haven't cleaned off my brush. It's just a big mess of this warm mix of colors. We'll get a hint of this in the foreground because it's going to be underneath all of our brighter colors. So while it is kind of a dull color like we've done in the back, it's going to support our more vibrant colors. And I apologize, I'm kind of working off camera there. I was really in the zone and not paying attention to my camera half the time. Slowly working towards some brighter colors. Make sure you vary up your brush work. So it's kind of a scribble, but sometimes my brush is moving up and down, sometimes side to side, sometimes around in a circle. Every couple of movements of the brush, I change the direction that it moves. A little more pains and burnt sienna, just working into that shadow area. Moving on to my long liner. So I'm getting some Payne's Gray and I'm mixing little extra drips of water in there so that the paint flows nicely on this brush. And we're gonna start scratching in some distant trees. I'm gonna hold my brush way far back so that it kind of does what it wants. I like when it takes away a bit of control from me. I think that the marks that I get look a little bit more natural. Just kind of scratching. Sometimes I get a line, sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's a full line, sometimes it's a broken line, and that's exactly what I'm looking for here. Same thing on this other side. And kind of moving out of that clump here on the left, I've got some larger trees. So I'm intentionally drawing just a little bit more of a specific tree shape. Notice the base of it is coming out of that little cluster a bit, kind of moving toward the foreground. Still not going to be terribly detailed on it, though I am giving them just a few branches. Don't put too much energy into these trees. They don't have to look great. They're going to be covered up quite a bit, actually, in the foreground trees that we do. But you never know what's going to show, so put a little bit of work into them, but don't give them too much personality because they might take away too much attention from the foreground trees. Now, I just put a little bit of white in there, some water, make sure that that flows nicely, and I'm just barely going to scratch in a few tree lines, not tree shapes, just some lines like that with this lighter color, because it feels like maybe there's a highlight or it's like a birch tree with white bark. It's just a little bit of variation. Nice and transparent there. I added a good amount of medium and just kind of toward the horizon, I'm barely scratching in some lines. You really can't even see them, but I feel like it helps just kind of give the impression that there's something back there. All right, back to my Filbert. Let's work on the sky one last time. Just going straight in with that nice, bright, warm color. Little bit of white, just so it's not overly hot. And just a bit of medium. And I'm going to place the Filbert bristles flat, so almost the entire length of the brush is on the canvas, but very lightly, and just kind of pulling that super warm, bright color out. Little medium just kind of helps it smear. primarily just this bright warm color that I'm doing the thicker application on. I'm not really going to go and repaint the entire sky in this thicker paint here. And then I'm just slowly taking it a little bit lighter. A little extra white, did not clean off my brush, and we're gonna get that center brightness in there. I didn't draw like a specific moon or sun shape. You could if you wanted to. I just gave it kind of a glowy center. A little bit of a pinky color there with some alizarin. Just kind of here where it merges into that yellowy color. Clean brush, and we're going to do our white cerulean mix and just touch up a bit of that blue sky color. Sometimes it's lighter, sometimes it's bluer than in other sections. Just a little bit of variation here and there. And I'm definitely going to be taking this color and overlapping just about everything. I think that if we keep these colors too separate, like that yellow looks a little separate to me right now, I just feel it looks like a big blob in the sky. So by overlapping everything, you say that everything exists in the same space, and that's what we want. See, that edge of that yellow was way too, it was way too separate from the blue, so I just went straight over top of it, and here as well, right into that yellow. but I'm working transparent, so I'm not just covering the yellow, just kind of assimilating it in. All right, clean brush, back into the burnt sienna. Just putting a little bit of medium in there so it's a bit on the transparent side. And this is that shadowy area between the clump of trees and the ground. Overlap the base of those trees, the ones that are coming forward. That's how you'll get them to stop looking like they're floating on top of the landscape, which they definitely looked like. All right, just mixing up a bunch of warm colors, some yellow, some orange, some burnt sienna, a hint of cerulean to bring it back down to kind of a natural color. A little bit of white. This is going to be a distance color. And we're just going to work on building different colors and textures on the ground here in the distance. Just warm it up a little bit more. Still working in that distance though. Letting that brushwork really show. At this point, if we fuzz these colors out too much like I tend to do, especially early in a painting, then it's not going to look like grasses and fallen leaves. It's just going to look fuzzy. So let some of your brushwork show. Straight into the burnt sienna. I still have a dirty brush. I didn't clean it. Add a little bit of alizarin to really pump up the red warmth in there. And we're coming a little bit closer into the foreground so we can get warmer. All right, back to my number 8, and we're gonna start with some cad orange and mix it into that same mixture of the burnt sienna, alizarin crimson. Just a little bit more of a pop color, and I'm gonna add just a little clump of trees back here. I decided I wanted something kind of halfway between us and that distant clump of trees. So just going to make kind of a strange, globby, transparent shape here. Nothing real specific just yet. And I will admit that I kind of struggled here with these trees. And I think it's primarily because I didn't have a very clear idea of what I wanted it to look like, what I wanted it to do. So you do see at one point me get a little bit frustrated. And I do that sometimes when I'm painting, and when that comes up, I'll show you what to look for in my frustration and why sometimes I'm really glad that I do that. Actually, it looks like we're going to do it right now. I'm on to my long liner. I've grabbed some burnt sienna, a little bit of Payne's gray, some water, and I'm going to add a little bit of white. And I thought, well, I'll throw some tree trunks in here, but this color did not look swell, didn't look great. And this is part of where I start getting, maybe not frustrated, but it starts getting away from me. So I start laying this color in. I'm like, ooh, this is not the right color. Okay, let's just go with it. So I'm just throwing some tree trunks in there, darken it up a bit more. So what happens when I get frustrated while I'm doing a painting is I start making movements and choices that aren't good. I know I should be taking more care, but I start scribbling, I start slapping, I start just grabbing random colors. And what happens a lot of times when I do that is what happened here. I suddenly go, oh wait, this actually looks good. So we're gonna let that dry for a minute and come back to it. I'm gonna use my 5/8 inch and I just picked up some Payne's gray. We're gonna work on a few other trees. I'm kind of giving myself a few minutes to think about those orange trees on the right and decide what I'm gonna do there. All right, let's go back into those tree trunks. No, this still looks like garbage. But let's lay in our primary trees. So these are going to be the big trees that are in the foreground, and I'm taking this first one straight off the top of the canvas. It goes all the way off. This one is going to stop. Nope, that one goes straight off the top of the canvas as well. We're going to start widening it out and bringing it up to the top. Kind of wiggling that brush a little bit as I go so that the bark is a little bit natural looking. I don't want it to be too sharp edged. Playing with the idea of some little tree roots showing. Ultimately, it doesn't show at the end because I put so much grasses and leaves and whatnot at the bottom. Widening this other one, but not quite as much. And then just taking that same color, making some little grasses and pokey-uppy bits at the bottom. And I thought, well, heck, maybe that's what these distant orange ones need. They need a little darker something at the base of them. All right, moving on to, I believe it's my number 2 round, might be my number 3, doesn't really matter. Mixing up some Payne's and some burnt sienna for kind of a natural old wood color. A little bit of medium. And we're gonna make some branches. I'm gonna hold my brush way far at the back and just give it some natural little craggy branch shapes. I'm also using it as an opportunity to fill in any parts of my tree that are a little transparent, as well as kind of shaping the bark. Keep a clean, damp brush handy just in case you have to wash off a branch that gets away from you like I did there a minute ago. Spend as much time as you want here building some branches coming off of the trees, but don't spend too much time doing the little twiggy ends. We're going to come back with the long liner and do that. I'm just getting the branches off of the tree, maybe doing a couple little branches, but for the most part, I'm going to save that work for my long liner. Just one more time using my clean Filbert to wipe away little bits of tree branch that got away from me. It's kind of a cool way to paint. It almost feels like you're sculpting the paint. You know, you can put a bunch on and not worry about it being too big, because then you can come back and you can press it back in and wipe some of it off. It's kind of a fun way to paint. Now I'm on to my long liner with that same mixture and a little extra water, just doing some of those little fine twiggy bits. I know that this brush can be challenging for some people to use, and I know that some people get frustrated when they try to make delicate little lines with this brush or with any brush, but practice can take you a long way. But at the same time, everybody is different, and if it's something you struggle with, it may be that no amount of practice is going to change that and make it easier for you to get these little hairline branches. And to that I say that's okay. Your hand moves differently than everybody else's, and everybody else's hand moves differently than everybody else's. So your marks are just as valid as anyone else's marks. So if you can't get these hairline branches, that is okay. Let your branches represent the marks that you make. Let it be obvious that your hand made it. Embrace what it is that you're able to do. Don't fight against it and be upset that you can't do something that someone else does. Because I may not be able to make the marks that you make. It doesn't mean that one of us is right and one of us is wrong. That's just how it is. So here's what I can do, and I can show you how to do only what it is I can do. But then it's up to you to interpret that through your own abilities. So that's a long way of saying that if your painting doesn't look like mine, that's a good thing, because you and I are completely different artists. My painting will look like my painting, and your painting will look like your painting. And that's the beautiful thing about art, is it's not about copying to a T and coming out with the exact same painting. That's not art, that's just mimicking. The point is to make art, and art comes from you. Just going to make some little twiggy bits coming up from the base of these trees, still using my long liner. Back to my Filbert, my number 8, getting a nice hot warm color with some burnt sienna and cadmium orange, toning it down a little bit with some of my very dried out cerulean blue. We are going to go back into these distant trees, and here's where you're really going to see me get a little on the frustrated side, folks. I hated the shape of these trees. I was not in love with the color. The tree trunks looked awful, and I just wanted nothing to do with them. And so I thought, well, this already looks really bad. I'm probably going to have to start this painting over, which I didn't want to do. But I thought, I'm just going to push it and just let it go until it's completely destroyed before I decide to start over. It's a little bit of a darker version of that color. By darker, I mean there's more blue in it. Kind of nudges it chromatically a little bit darker. Looked really awful. Thought maybe it needs some bright orange. No, didn't really need any bright orange either. Long liner, Payne's Gray. Maybe it needed some extra branches and tree trunks. You can see I'm getting really careless here with my marks. Look at how I'm choking down on that long liner. That looks awful, and I know it, and I'm being super careless here. This was about 3 seconds before I decided to just trash the painting. Flat just to give it some little grassy bits. And I thought, what the heck? Back into some of that orange. A little bit more yellow. And I'm applying that paint pretty thick here. And that color I thought was really exciting. I like that. So it's the orange with a bit of cerulean in it. Throw in that yellow and you get this muddy, earthy, greenish color that I thought was gorgeous. And suddenly, I like those little distant trees. So sometimes if you're frustrated in something you're doing, this is the point I wanted to illustrate. This is why I pointed it out. If you're frustrated with something and the next step is you're just going to trash it, you're going to stop painting it, then by all means, just start thrashing and throwing whatever you can at it, because you never know what you're suddenly going to go, oh, that looks really good. I actually like that. And it pulls it back suddenly from the brink of being trashed. Now, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes it just gets so worse that you have no choice but to trash it. But the times that it doesn't are really exciting and very, very worth it. So please always stop before you trash a painting. Go ahead and get frustrated and just make a mess. See what happens. I'm onto my 5/8 inch now, and I just mixed up some Payne's Gray with some medium. We're going to really darken those shadowy areas and start building in a bunch of texture in this foreground. Since it's closest to us, we would see more texture and detail here than in the distance. I think this actually has a little bit of burnt sienna in it as well. Again, every time my brush touches, it touches at a different direction. Sometimes up and down, side to side, angular, whatever. I like to keep those dark shadows on the edge of the road. It helps make the road feel like it's pressed down a little bit lower than the rest of the ground. Clean brush, getting a little bit of white and some cerulean, but I'm going to tone it down just a little because it's a little bright. Just put in a tiny hint of that burnt sienna just to nudge the blue a little toward gray. And of course, medium. We want to keep this pretty transparent at first. We're going to start doing the puddles in the ruts of the road. And I'm not exactly sure where I want them and what kind of shape. So right now I'm just giving myself a lot of options, putting it in a lot of places on the road. If some of that road color that we were just working in is still wet and it blends with this color, that is perfectly okay. That's just going to help you get that streaky water look. Now I did not clean my brush. It still has that cerulean white mixture, and I'm just going into the burnt sienna, adding a bit of Payne's. We're going to start kind of working around that color, assimilating the water into the road. Overlapping that water in a lot of places. And I know my water was still wet here, so it is blending a little, which I don't usually do much of. If your water is dry and it's not blending, just pick up a little extra medium when you overlap it, and that will streak the brown into it and make it look like it's blending. A little bit more Payne's into that same mixture. And a little more blue because that burnt sienna is so warm and vibrant. Just really kind of mixing up a slightly different version of that color every time I go back for more paint. Remember that the ruts, the part where the tires actually go, would be just a little bit darker than the top part, or at least that's a good way to get it to look different from the top part, the center of the road. So keep those ruts a little bit darker. And here I'm just mixing up a nice muddy gray. I have yellow and cerulean and orange and Payne's and white and everything in there. So it's a little bit lighter, a little bit, just a little bit different looking. Onto my Filbert, starting in that orange yellow with a hint of burnt sienna. Nice vibrant color. And we're gonna start really popping some kind of fallen leaf colors and shapes in here. Applying that color a bit thicker, not really streaking it out too much. Just a little bit here and there. A little medium helps with the streaking and just getting some really natural kind of organic shapes. Just picked up medium again. The key here is going to be layering. This first layer of colors looks odd, but every time we add another layer, it's gonna look better and better. Bring some of that down into the rocky shapes here, because it'll look like some leaves are fallen into the rocks along the side of the road. As well as up underneath these trees. just darkening that color a little bit more with some medium to go underneath the trees. And whatever I do on the left, I'm going to do at least a tiny bit of it on the right. I got an extra drip of water. I did not clean off my brush. I think you know where this is going. We're going to brighten that a little bit more with some cadmium orange. Get this paint nice and thin so that it just about flows. Scoop up a good bit of it, and I'm going to flick just some. It's okay if it goes a little wild, if some flicks get on the street or even up toward the sky. It'll just look like leaves falling or flying around in the air. And I had a little blob here, so I'm just going to kind of nudge that little blob out. Much, much better. All right, clean brush. Let's mess with the rocks on the bottom. So I'm just looking for a warm gray with some of that burnt sienna panes and a little bit of white. It's a very dark gray, and I'm going to start making some rock shapes. So whatever that means to you, whatever kind of shapes you need to do, whatever kind of brushwork you need to do to make it look like there's rocks. What I'm doing is I'm working with short angular strokes. So a lot of them move at an angle downward to the right, but then I might have a fairly horizontal mark above that, maybe a couple that move downward to the left, but they're short angular brush marks. A little more white and brown, just for some highlighty bits. See, here you can see more the type of brushwork that I'm doing. And I like to swipe out the bottom edge sometimes. Try not to make patterned shapes. Those three shapes look almost exactly alike, so I'm just going to break it up a little bit. There we go. Another extra drip. We're going to get some panes. A little bit of burnt sienna in there to warm it up. And again, you know where I'm going with this. Extra drip of water, get that paint until it just about flows. And again, I'm not worried if this color gets anywhere else in the painting. It will just add some texture and interest to the painting, so don't worry about it. Just flick it all over this road, and then I'm using the back of my finger to streak out some of the flicks. Not all of them, just some of them. I was talking to one of my members in my YouTube membership group recently, and she was saying that she has a hard time doing sand and kind of soil texture. And so we talked about flicking, how just a little bit of flicking like I'm doing here, I'm doing this now with a slightly lighter version. It just gives you enough small texture that I think helps it look more believable as soil or dirt, and really with very little work. So I know not everybody loves flicking, but I think that if you refuse to flick, which I know some people do, I think you're missing out on an opportunity to really get some awesome texture. And if you're flicking in a very controlled way like I do, you won't get paint all over the place. Like, I don't have paint all over my face or all over the floor or walls or anything, because it's very controlled. So if you can learn how to do it in that controlled way, I think you really open yourself up to some excellent texturing abilities. All right, mix here of yellow, orange, burnt sienna, and a good amount of cerulean, so I get a nice earthy green. We do need a little bit of some greenish tones in our ground here. It's a bit transparent. I added a good amount of medium to it, but I think that subtle earthy green is really, really helpful in this painting. And I'm adding some of it to the rocks. Maybe it's mosses or leftover grasses, but it also helps cover up any weird things that might have happened in the rocks. I really love that green. I feel like once I started adding that green, the ground started really coming alive. And look at how pretty that green is next to that warmer red color back there. They work really well together. Some little grassy shapes at the base of those trees. Clean brush, just some white and some cerulean. We're going to work on the water in the road a little bit. I just muddied it up with a hint of that grayish brown color. And a point of medium. And we're just going to smooth it over our little water areas. Some of my road color is still a little bit wet from the flicking, and it's blending in with my watercolor, and that's okay. A little bit more of a true blue there, primarily for these close-up puddles. And once this dries, we'll come back and finalize these puddles. I'm mostly just still working on the base color and the shape of them. Really smear them out and almost connect each of them. Don't leave them individual little polka dots in the road. See how all of these pretty much blur together at some point. Clean brush, burnt sienna, and Payne's gray. Bit of medium, so it's a hint transparent. And we're working in those wheel ruts. Now we can start taking away any of the puddle that was too big, too wide. Just building some of the darkness in those wheel ruts. And texture. Don't just paint it all dark there. But also notice I'm not taking this dark, dark color all the way into the back. It's just primarily in the front of the foreground of the road. Overlapping those rocks a little bit, just so they're not too much in the corner. They're not too bright or anything. Really just keeping that dark color to the edges of the road. Again, just to make sure that there's a difference between it and the ground. All right, adding a good amount of white to that. And let's warm it up a bit more. Nice gray color. And we'll keep this mostly in the center of the road. But I kept struggling with this. I hadn't planned on doing much else to the road, but I just felt like it didn't look like what I wanted it to look like. I feel like the texture is a little aggressive here, and it just looks super plain. So we're gonna come back and we're gonna add some little grasses into the middle of the road. I like it when you're driving down an old rutted dirt road and there's grasses and things growing up in the middle. So clean number 8 Filbert, just a little bit of plain cerulean. We're gonna amp up the sky color in these puddles a bit. A little poke of white for some reflection. Just hints of it in the distance. All right, clean brush back into the yellow, and I've already got that messy green color there, so we'll just amp that up. Little yellow, the cerulean obviously, a little hint of burnt sienna. And let's start placing some grasses in the middle of the road on kind of that hump between the tire ruts. That was exactly what I was looking for right there. I liked that so much better. Just varying up that color mixture, getting some darker, some lighter, some more vivid greens, all kinds of greens. And my brushwork is primarily up and down to make it look like grasses that are standing up, obviously. And remember that Payne's Gray and Cadmium Yellow Light make a gorgeous green. While we're at it, we might as well put some of that color on the ground on the sides of the road. Let's just make it a little bit more vibrant. I'm just mixing off to the side there. I don't want it to be a crazy bright green because we don't have crazy bright green anywhere else in the painting. I don't think that a crazy bright green would agree with the rest of the painting, so it is very subtle. All right, back to my number 2 round brush, getting that muddy color, just kind of dirtying up my brush. We'll add just a few very transparent highlights down the side of this primary tree. We'll do a few on the tree behind it, but not a lot. Just choose one side or the other to add some of this transparent gray color to. And if you get too much or, something somewhere where you don't want it, just come back with your Payne's Gray afterwards and nudge back anything that was too much. Just a tiny bit, whatever's left on my brush, on this back tree. Not going to put a lot of energy into it. Go straight into the Payne's Gray. A little bit of medium, and I'm just going to glaze out, like I said, anything that was too much or that I felt like didn't blend into the tree as well as I wanted it to. Clean brush, poked into my white, poked into the cerulean, and I'm going to poke into the medium as well. We're just going to do some tiny little streaks in the puddles for a final highlight. Let it be nice and bright. And that is really all there is to this painting. Thank you so much, everyone, for hanging out and painting along with me. And if there's any type of autumn or Halloween paintings you'd like to see coming up this season, let me know in the comments below. And I hope to see you all again very, very soon.